So how did 80 personal belongings of African king leave his mountain home and end up locked away in a British museum forever? I'm Joana, and here we explore Africa's untold stories. So in 1862, the diplomatic king Moshoeshoe I of Basotho sent 80 personal items to a London exhibition, hoping to strengthen ties with Britain. These artifacts never returned. So let's dig in to find out the history of this king and why he might have needed to send these personal belongings. King Moshoeshoe was the founder of the Basotho nation. Basotho nation is in Lesotho, which is a landlocked country in South Africa, entirely surrounded by South Africa. King Moshoeshoe was born under the name Lepoku. I don't know if I pronounced that well, I'm sorry. The name is written on the screen. So around the age of 6, he began tending to the family's sheep and goats. And as a young man, Moshoeshoe continued to lead his band into cattle raids, becoming notable for his skills in seizing cattle. That's like stealing cattle. He was ambitious, but also known for his short temper. One time, he even killed a follower for milking one of his cattle without his approval. So Moshoeshoe and his followers established his village at Bute, where his settlement and reign coincided with the growth in power of the well-known Zulu king of Shaka. So in 1820s, the Basotho faced a number of cattle raids from the Korana. It was during this time that they first encountered horses and guns in a combat setting. After a number of initial setbacks, the Basotho managed to either capture or acquire horses and guns themselves. They wanted to have their own, and they started stockpiling gunpowder. Now, by 1843, Moshoeshoe had accumulated more horses and guns than any other chieftain in South Africa. But most of the guns in Moshoeshoe's possessions were outdated. I don't know if you knew that. In 1833, missionaries from the Paris Evangelical Missionary Society, led by French missionaries, they began setting their own outposts in Basotho land following Moshoeshoe's invitation. So actually, he invited them. He was looking for something. They promoted the combination of Christianity, Western civilization, and commerce. They saw Basotho's custom linked to obligatory labor and the dependence of the population and their chiefs. They saw it more like evil and backwards. So now, what did they decide to do? They now decided to undermine them by promoting private property and the commodification of production and closer economic ties with European settlers. See what's happening on the ground? Something's cooking. So in the 1850s, the Basotho nation, led by King Moshoeshoe, increasingly found itself in conflict with Boer settlers over land and territorial rights. Now, let's not forget to, I'm always saying we're in Africa. Then they continuously encroached into traditional Basotho land, resulting in significant losses of territory during this whole period. So sometimes I wonder what life would be like, what life would have been if it was just, us going to Europe, seeing some of their customs and calling it evil, encroaching in, taking their land, banning their traditions, dethroning their king. Sometimes I wonder, how would that be like? That's maybe a film to make. I don't know. Then going as far as introducing our own traditional warships and trying to change their way of life. Well, anyway, let's come back to our story. In 1848, Cape Governor Sir Harry Smith pressured Moshoeshoe into signing an agreement where he recognized British paramount authority over the lands north of the Orange River while retaining his traditional rights. You see, that's so funny. It's so weird. They really believe in their paper. Okay, anyway, the agreement also envisioned the creation of an alliance between the British and the Basotho. Meanwhile, the Northeast, the Basotho and their Taung allies regularly engaged in tit-for-tat cattle raid against their older enemies, the Batlokau of Koksi, Sekonyela, and the Korana of Gret Taibosh. These names, oh, I love them. I love them. They sound very powerful. Sometimes I want to know the meaning of all these names. Anyway, the British residents in the Orange River, Sovereignty Major Henry Douglas Warden, believed that the Basotho were more to blame for the continuous intertribal warfare in the region. Now, and we can't say if that's true or not, but what's Warden do next? Warden began delineating borders between the various tribes in the northeast frontier, ignoring Moshoeshoe's long-standing claims to several territories in the process. Moshoeshoe believed that the British had failed to protect him against Batlakau and the Boer encroachment, while many of his subjects accused him of cowardice in the face of the British oppression. He was trying to do diplomatic talk now, so his people were like, why are you doing this? It must have been a very tough time for him, sitting in between that thin line, right? On the 25th of June, 1851, Warden demanded that the Basotho restore cattle and horses to the victims of their past cattle raid. Matter we don't finish. This guy say, may we open up. Warden had assembled a mixed force of British, Boer, and African troops, numbering approximately about 2,500 men at Katberg. On the 28th of June, Warden moved his forces against the Taung in effort to seize stolen cattle. On the 30th of June, Warden's forces were defeated by the Basotho Taung army at the Battle of Fifoit. What next? On October, Moshoeshoe wrote to both Smith and Warden explaining that he had acted in self-defense and intended to maintain cordial relation with the British. So he was still so diplomatic, like, I don't want to fight, I don't want to battle, let's talk. For someone who's very ambitious and badly tempered man, this behavior was surprising. It must have taken a lot from him, do you get? In February 1852, the British agreed to withdraw the boundaries in the southwest and to cease colonial interference into inter-tribal conflicts in exchange for the restoration of the cattle the Basotho had stolen since September 1850. So my question now is, did they steal the cattle from the British? Okay, I don't understand. Who owns the cattle? They're now using the cattle that they didn't bring from, or maybe, wait, happy? The British, they brought cattle from England, from Europe as they were coming. Because I don't know what they're asking for, because they're using that now as a point of negotiation, do you get? Or they're acting on behalf of those from which the cattle was stolen, because they've allied with those. Very complex situation. No story is ever one way, one line, one shade, straightforward. Anyway, what did Moshoeshoe, what did he do? Can he return the cattle? We don't know. But on the 20th of December 1852, a British expeditionary force clashed with the Basotho in the Battle of Berea. A combination of poor British planning and determined resistance from the Basotho resulted in a temporary British retreat from that area. So they were defending their spaces, fearing that a second British assault would result in a military defeat, because he knows they are going to retreat now, go and recoup. Do you get? So Moshoeshoe sued for peace, attaining favorable terms and restoring amicable relationship with the British. In 1861, Moshoeshoe, at his mountain home in Taba, Bosigo in Lesotho, was visited by one J.M. Hockwell. Hockwell announced that there was going to be an international exhibition in London in 1862 and that the natal government had appointed him to endeavor to procure from Moshoeshoe. So if he felt so disposed, arts and manufacturers from his country would be exhibited as coming from the chief, so he should give them some things to, like, you know, just exhibit from his country. Hockwell then advised that Queen Victoria and Prince Alfred, whom Moshoeshoe had met, would see these objects and that he would be greatly acknowledged as donating them to the exhibition. Now it's getting tricky. Legal terms. At this stage, there are two things. Hockwell seemed to sell Moshoeshoe English royal validation. Think about that. Number two, suggests that if Moshoeshoe sent items, they would be considered a donation. That's a tricky framing, which later opens questions. But for me, I have a simple question. Did Moshoeshoe gift these items to England? Let me know what you think. Let me know if you know more about this. Or is this framing so vague that you can't even tell? So Moshoeshoe asked Howell for a specific list of objects, which Howell provided and which had been issued by the natal government anyway. Moshoeshoe was happy to oblige the commission, and Mr. Howell, whom he also considered a friend, he thought he was doing a favor. James Michael Howell was one of the commissioners involved in the peace treaty between the Orange Free State and Chief Moshoeshoe, right? So they knew each other before, so be very careful. Mind you, these belongings Moshoeshoe gave out was also in part an attempt to negotiate protection from the British for his people. And how did that go? You'll find out very soon. What are some of these belongings anyway? There's a strainer, amulet, blanket, breastplate, collar, flask, a shield, hat, knife, leglet, milk vessel, scraper, shield, smoking pipe, snuff box, a flat brown pair of leather sandals. Sometimes I ponder about the purpose of a museum, right? The idea of collecting and displaying, something I really sometimes ponder about. So how did the exhibition go? These objects were displayed at the Natal Court at the London exhibition, and they attracted interest, but after the event, many were purchased by British collector Henry Christie and later bequeathed to the British Museum upon his death in 1865. Now, this is funny. I have a question. Did the British have the plans initially to get these items and sell them, or did they even have the intention of returning them? So that's why that framing is good to understand. Was it a donation? I feel like something went wrong here. Anyway, drop your comments if you know more about this story. I want to learn more about this story. All these items were later acquired by the British Museum, where they have remained ever since. So today, these belongings are not even on display anymore. So where are they keeping them? Well, I've heard that in the dungeons of Western Museum, you have more things there. King Moshoeshoe's belongings form part of the Basotho material cultural heritage. So when the collections was removed, the Basotho were deprived of the benefit of these cultural belongings created by their ancestors, losing an avenue of learning from their heritage. And remember that after so much time, it will lose meaning because people are not educated about it, they don't know about it. As Lesotho continues to define itself as a young nation, the cultural resources are vital in helping the Basotho to understand and define themselves more fully, particularly in terms of their creative cultural production. Around 80 belongings that was taken from Moshoeshoe are significant because they give both context and credence to the historical narrative around Basotho material culture. But today, only about 40 of these objects are in the British Museum. At least that's what we can probably see from our research. So where are the remaining ones? I don't know. If you know, drop a comment beneath. That was an Africa's Untold Story, and I am Joana.